Naivas specifically, and you'll be helping toward this. Our next guest is in the studio. We want to talk about reparations for victims of torture. This is going to be a big one. Isabella Obara is the technical lead for litigation and legal advice at the Independent Medical Legal Unit. Good morning, Isabella.
Good morning, Latif.
Good to have you on the show again.
Oh, I'm happy to be back.
Welcome back to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Asante sana.
We're talking about torture.
Yes.
Victims of torture.
Right.
And what they ought to get in terms of justice for them.
Yeah.
Reparations. It's going to be a big one. Let me introduce you to Wangari. Wangari Moikia is our guest host today. She's been here with us since 5 a.m. See how energetic she still looks?
Good job.
She can do
You're
this
an
thing.
early riser,
I've been surviving on Mentos. Let me
you
just
said
tell
coffee.
you what happens behind the scenes.
I see.
Yeah, so she's our guest host today. Siti, the day's proverb.
Yes, our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the country of Chad. Today's proverb: there is no such thing as a small fire or a small woman.
There is no such thing as a small fire or a small woman. Isabella, you are the first female guest occupying that seat this morning.
Perfect.
Tell us your interpretation of this proverb.
And before I say, let me throw another one, because when I was here last, there was something that said, City, I have one that has been very interesting and would be useful for us in this discussion.
Right.
It's a West African proverb, and they say, when a woman is running and they hold their breasts, it's not because they'll fall, it's because of beauty.
Hey.
Right? Though you may know.
Again?
When a woman is running and they hold their breasts,
Yes.
it's not because they'll fall.
Yes.
Who will fall?
Because of beauty.
It's not
The
because the
breasts.
woman will fall?
No, it's not because the breast will fall.
Or it's not because the breast will
It's
fall?
because of beauty. So we'll juggle that as we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now back to you.
City, I got you in that.
Come back here, City. Come back
Join
here.
us.
Come back
Come
here.
back.
Where do you think I'd gone? What?
This sort of today, what's your interpretation of it? No
Well-
small thing as a fire or a small woman.
Well, and I'll take a rough stab at it because I was heavily invested in mine, but my thinking is I had to be very selfish. But my thing is, I feel like, and I look at it from the human rights perspective, it's just that everyone has a role to play in this particular race. Everyone has something to give. You could be a content creator, you could be a security officer, a procurement officer, a lawyer, because the way we've looked at issues around torture is you have to be a lawyer or a medical practitioner or a pathologist who can document deaths. No. If there's no such thing as small, maybe a fire or a woman or whatever it is the city has said, my thinking, my very rough interpretation is that there's nothing small in this particular fight. Everyone has something to give. That's just how I'd look at it for now.
Okay.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Our
Thank you.
position with proverbs and the interpretations thereof is that your interpretation is always correct
Perfect.
because it is your interpretation. Yes.
And from my context and what we do every day, I have gone around just saying, hey, if you work around data, there's something you can do for human rights. If you are a clinician, there's something you can do. If you're a nutritionist, there's something you can do. It's not just legal work, truly. It's not legal work, and we need to move from that particular space. And that's what I see from what City has just said.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, victims of torture. First question, is there an official universal definition of torture?
Yes, there
And
is.
what is it?
Okay, so based on the Convention Against Torture, Article 1, we pick it with 4 ingredients. Yeah, so it's not the usual Latif, oh my God, I'm broke, I'm so tortured. In the legal space, what we say is, first thing, it has to be intentional infliction of pain, whether physical or mental. That's the first one. And then by a public officer, and this one we'll discuss at a later point. That's a public officer in their official capacity.
Okay, not as your spouse. Or
That's
your
where we go
parents.
wrong. But I'll tell you something else on that. In the official capacity, with intent and in a given, maybe intensity. They also talk about intensity, but with intent. Are you trying to get information? Are you trying to deter someone from accessing justice? There's normally some intention. Or maybe you're trying to subdue, maybe you're arresting someone. So we have 4 ingredients.
Intentional
infliction of pain, or physical or mental,
yes,
or emotional, and then by a public officer in their official capacity with intent to a certain intensity.
Okay.
But you'll notice that there are certain countries who've moved forward to now remove the aspect of public officer, because they argue that there are certain heinous crimes that need not be in that particular space only. We have Armenia, we have Montenegro, we have, I think, Queensland state in Australia. But Kenya as is, we must have that ingredient of a public officer, especially in the official capacity.
Okay.
So that's generally the definition.
Public officer.
Yes.
Is it the same as a public defender?
No. So a public officer is someone who's being paid from the public coffers. So you have to be a state officer. And every time we discuss this, we keep thinking, maybe it's just a police officer. No. You don't have to be a police officer to be a public officer.
So
Right.
anybody who is paid by the public
Yes.
is a public officer.
Right.
Not all state officers are public officers. Well, not all public officers are state
state
officers.
officers, yes.
But all state officers are public officers.
Right.
Okay. Anybody who works.
Are we mixing that up?
I think he's correct.
No, all state
You are.
officers are public officers.
Yes.
But not
Yes,
all
but not
public
all
officers
are
As state
are
officers,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, or civil servants. I think.
Yeah. So everybody who is paid by whether
Every
it's
other
somebody
person.
who is employed as a security officer, as a teacher,
Yes.
as a police officer, as a judge.
Yeah.
as-
Latif, let me give you the best example.
Okay.
You have a chief. So we normally go to Mashinani.
Yes.
2 weeks ago, IMLU was in Isabella trying to document cases of police violation during Maandamano. I think you remember.
Yes.
A few people were shot dead. And so you have chiefs. Yeah, and in those spaces, chiefs are very revered and respected, and they're very, powerful. And so they have these small boys who work with them. So they go around in a pro box. So it could be their cousin, younger brother, who they can just say, go to Latif's house and raid the pombe he has in that space. When they do that, they also become.
Just pause for a second. Young men, when you say small boys, I'm thinking of 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds.
Yes, young men. Ordinarily, it's young men. Obviously, they're people of legal age, all right,
Okay.
but they're young men, yeah.
Carry on.
Okay.
Yes.
And so when they work with them, they also become public officers because they're working under the acquiescence of the state. And I've spoken about this before, because you're under instruction of a public officer.
But are they paid?
No, now that's why I told you there's an extra layer of complexity in this particular discussion, because if you're being instructed by a person who's a public officer, especially in the official capacity, you'll be also a person who can be charged for torture.
Okay.
Because you're under instruction, right? So
Okay.
the payment aspect is something that just helps us to understand who a public officer is. But if they can instruct, right, then indeed we presume that possibly this person is paying you this benefit or interest. Yeah.
Is this the law?
It is the law.
It is the law.
It is the law.
Is it the same law which now, if you happen to be caught with an item that is known to have been stolen, then you are better off having stolen the item than having been somebody who is actually found with a stolen item?
Yeah.
Same sort of law.
It's the same. Well, look. So
What's the thinking behind it? I just want to understand.
the thinking behind it is this person is in a space of power, right? And for you're trained to ensure that, so you have positive and legal obligation to ensure the security of a person. So we presume that you have the capacity and the tools to make sure that this person is safe. And if that particular training does not remind you or restrain you from instructing people in a certain way, then we will hold you to account, and then we hold the person you're instructing to account. That's where the issue of command responsibility comes from.
Right.
So to answer you, what you're talking about is aiding and abetting if you're hiding or you're transporting. That's a different subject, but the same thinking. Yeah.
It's the
So
same
what
thinking.
happens? Okay, I think when I was thinking about this yesterday, I was like, okay, do they deal with things like shakahola? I guess not, because this torture, I guess it's to some degree, free, but he's not a public officer. I was thinking about Lamu, what happened with the other day with the beheadings, and I was like, okay, maybe that's not under your purview. But things like when you talked about maandamano, like the strikes, I think when we were having every Tuesday and Thursday the strikes, and then the officers are tear gassing people, and that kind of controlling of protests, right? Is that considered? Because I imagine the public officers, the soldiers, right,
Police
who are
officers.
under the purview that you're talking about, are controlling a crowd according to how they've been trained, but can that be considered torture? Is that under your purview? Can someone come and say, I was tear gassed, so there needs to be a case? And then how does that also link up with the processes of the government in terms of disciplining their own officers? How do you play in?
It saddens me a great deal to discuss this because, first of all, yes, it falls under our purview because this is a National Police Service officer while doing crowd control. For us, we call crowd management, crowd control, but they'll talk about public order and everything. But that being said, if you're protesting, right, is there a need for any use of excessive force? Is there a need? Just randomly, if I may ask, is there a need for any use of excessive force?
I'm not sure.
The general rule of
get out of hand, right?
What is out of hand? You see, when we define, so we've now moved to public protest, so we've digressed, but that's fine. So when we're looking at issues of protest, how do we define a peaceful protester in Kenya? There's no proper definition. All we say is that you should be peaceful and unarmed. What the hell is that? What the hell is that? So if I'm raising maybe a carton box written something, or maybe I'm shouting, does that mean I'm armed? And you see, the general rule of the thumb is that you should not use force at any point while managing a crowd. That's just the general rule. So in the event that this person is armed, maybe throwing stones or maybe causing danger or posing danger to yourself as an officer or to the public or to property, then there's some force you can use, but still not excessive force. The Public Order Act has several guidelines in which you can maybe de-escalate a situation, yeah? So by the time you're shooting in the air to kill, or maybe you're just shooting randomly, have you followed all these other procedures in the standard operating procedures while managing a crowd? My answer would be no. We were in Isabella, I'll have you know that, and we went right to the point where the late Johanna was shot. He was a guitarist, leaving service. He was shot not knowing where people were doing the maandamano. He just got caught into it. The funny thing, or something that should haunt us as Kenyans continuously, is that we have allowed, or we have been very okay with other people being shot, not knowing that you and I can even get shot in traffic. Right? So the question, or rather for us, what is important with the kind of work that we do is that at no particular point should there be use of excessive force. So, and I'll have you know that once we complete documentation in Isabella, in Kisumu, in Nairobi, we're going to proceed to court. So the first steps that we're taking is to undertake legal documentation as enshrined in the Istanbul Protocol 2022, the new edition. And what that does is that it captures both mental and physical harms caused during protests, yeah? So once we're done with that, we'll write to the Inspector General and say, hey, we had a few of your officers in this place, could we have their names? Just to request him for information. Certainly, they may respond, sometimes they may not respond, but that's fine. What you're trying to do is we're giving the state agencies, the responsible state agencies, a chance to respond and support, because the practice has always been, when we're looking or working with victims of torture, as CSO, sometimes we tend to think we can work in silos. It doesn't work. The state in itself is the one that will be offering reparations that we're going to talk about here. So we'll write to them. If they don't respond, we'll proceed to court. But all I'm saying is, to just wrap this up, again, it should haunt us the way in which we handle crowds, because it could be me walking to buy airtime down in my flat, and there's a trigger-happy officer just shooting in the air, simply because you want to scare people. And I hate that we do that, because the public order is what we used during the pre or post-colonial period. And you'll notice that the people we copy-pasted this particular law from have already moved. They have since moved. For us, we have gone through different cycles of public protest and lobbying and picketing, but we still use that very old act. There have been several attempts to change it, but nothing has changed. Why do we have a small elite group of police officers working the way they did? pre or post-colonial. Like, are we dealing with people who are just black? Because the way it was whites against black, and black is bad, rowdy, confused, uneducated. That's not, I mean, now we are Kenyans, we are educated, we have the tools, we know things. We need to move from public order to crowd management.
And so when you're putting someone, or I don't know what the word is, convict, I don't know what the word is, when you get someone who has undertaken this, it's that person who's going to be facing the charges and not their superior.
Okay, I like that question. I'll tell you why. When we are looking at issues of these particular acts around torture, there are two facets. The first one being issues of command responsibility. I mean, you know how a service works. It's yes, sir. And I can give you an order.
The chief sends a young man now.
Yeah. So there's that aspect, which we must talk about. And you'll see there's some live cases in court that have been solely founded on command responsibility. And so we're saying, because you are not giving us information as to who you had posted in Isabella to manage that crowd, okay, so you come tell us in court. So command responsibility, we will hold you. And then also you'll notice in the National Police Service Act, there are certain sections of the law that indicate that if there's any death or injury, the person who has been assigned that task needs to come to you as the superior and report. And once they report, then you have to make a report to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority as the senior. And so some of these steps, when they're not followed, then we question you under command responsibility, because you know far too well what had happened, but you didn't do anything. And then now there's that particular place where we lift that veil of you being in service, because I mean, they're good cops. They are there. So we lift that veil and say, hey, now you as an officer are being investigated for 1, 2, 3, and you will be charged in a criminal court. Or even we could go maybe file a constitutional and human rights petition and also have you as a person outside the office. We do respect the offices, but when we have enough information and proper investigation reports, then you can also be charged as a person.
I've got a question, and maybe a couple of questions, and this is with regards now to what you've said. When you an organization such as IMLU goes to Isibania and it's conducting investigations on what is alleged torture that took place, and you're documenting it, for you to be able to take it to court, you need to be able to prove that indeed torture happened in the way we've defined it: intentional infliction of physical or emotional pain by a public officer in their official capacity with intent and to a certain intensity. Now, how will you gather information that supports all this? Number one, how do you actually document that there was infliction of emotional pain? Number two, you can get the public officer, yes. But certain intensity, how do you gauge the intensity?
Okay. First, let me say this, Latif. Justice looks very different, very, very different from several people. So torture victims will tell you, when you go to them, they'll tell you, I now have my arm amputated from a gunshot, but all I need is for you to get me something I can do, because now I've lost, maybe mobility or whatever. This is all I want. I don't want to go to court. Another person will tell you, I actually want to go to court. I don't care how long it will take. I genuinely want to go to court. Another person will tell you, I simply want an apology. Right?
Just an acknowledgement.
Just an acknowledgement.
To me.
Yes. Because torture affects people in different ways. It could be a person, it could be a family, it could be a whole community. So a community will tell you, we simply want the truth. We don't want to know maybe how much you'd give us or what compensation. We don't want the millions. We just want the truth. Tell us what happened to our kin. And that's all the closure that we need. So once we know that, you'll realize that going to court is just but a small facet of seeking reparations. But even with that being said, for us, we document based, like I said, on the Istanbul Protocol. And the truth about the current context is that it has been and it still is very hard to prove emotional distress as caused by torture. However, when we are doing our assessment, what we do is we have several officers going with us to the field. So we have a legal practitioner, and we have a psychologist, we have a medical officer, and we also have someone who's a counselor, because sometimes it gets very, very teary. So during that process, we will take witness statements. I mean, the usual legal stuff. So you'll take the biodata, the witness statements, maybe the victim statements and everything. The medical officer will do their thing. I mean, I'm not a medical officer. They'll do what they need to do. Once we have that, because we do not have that investigation muscle, we will do a petition to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. Where appropriate, we'll also send it to the Internal Affairs Unit. And then they will do their bit. Especially this is to trigger the criminal prosecution.
Right.
Because you see, we don't prosecute, we simply watch brief, right? So that's that. But in the civil space, what we normally do is we put together a nice bundle of documents. And this is, we don't want to get into a legal lecture, so many people are listening, but we'll put down together a nice bundle of documents and proceed to court. And we have done that. And I'll have you know that on 4th of April, we won a petition in Migori. That's for whoever would like to listen. It's petition number 8 of 2021, where 4 victims had been shot severally during the repeat elections in 2017. So we have had a track record of winning, but then the question is, do we get compensation for these particular people?
You see, it's clear to me when it's physical, gunshot wound, maybe there's an injury and all. Psychologically, it's still very hard. I mean, our jurisprudence hasn't moved to that level. If you look at the, let's say, in America, we've had people who've been compensated for psychological trauma, the trauma they have suffered. And the truth is, in as much as maybe our laws or our courts have not pronounced themselves on this particular aspect of torture, is that what you carry and what, I mean, medics argue to be lifelong is the psychological effects of torture. With maybe a gunshot wound, sometimes you may heal. If your skin is really nice, you may heal. So you may not carry it, but after that, you'll hear people talking about anxiety, hypervigilance, and all those things. But we still don't have a judgment that actually compensates people for the psychological effects of torture. But what we have, Latif, is punitive damages. And we have had at least, in one case, sometime in 2021 January, we received up to 3 million in terms of punitive damage. But in terms of psychological, we still don't have it.
There's this school that is headed by one Dr. Smoking Wanjala. They help retrain, re-educate, resensitize people who have studied what you learned friends study.
The Judiciary Training Institute.
That's the one I was speaking of. Yes. Now, this school, in its curriculum, do they have units of psychology? But if they don't, when you are undertaking your legal studies, do you have units of psychology that you study? And if so, how many? And if so, do you even remember them?
Oh, wow. This is interesting. I may not firmly speak on the particular school that we are discussing here with respect to the units that they have, but every human rights practitioner, especially in the torture space, has gone through some form of trauma competency training. And I mean, IMLU offers that, International Justice Mission offers that, and there are other partners who offer those small trainings. And I call them small specifically because we do not have a proper curriculum that will train lawyers, maybe advocacy officers, judicial officers.
Police.
And it's the small things like if a witness just starts being very broody and sad and upset before, a court session, do you just say, this is a difficult witness? She's my star witness, but very difficult. If you're trauma competent and you've been trained and you remember your psychology, you'd know, oh my God, this person is anxious. So what we still do now is if I go to court, I will be with our psychological lead or a counselor. Always. In fact, if you go into a room of at least 3-4 victims of torture, you have to go with a counselor. You must. Yeah? Because there are certain things I won't see. And not because I'm nascent, it's just because I don't have the training, or maybe I just don't have the know-how.
So they don't teach this in law school,
Well, not in my law school.
Isabella Obara is a technical lead for litigation and legal advice at the Independent Medical Legal Unit. Today we are talking about torture and reparations for victims of torture. We'll hear what IMLU has been doing and what it's doing and what we need to know about torture. In fact, if you have an issue and you need to raise it also, how can you reach out to IMLU so they can support you? Siti?
You know, the subject of torture, it doesn't matter how you twist it, it's always a difficult one.
Always.
Yes, because our reference point here is human beings, and you wonder why it's absolutely necessary even for it to take place. But even more so when we talk about a unit within our community as Kenyans whose main function is supposed to be protecting lives, and yet every time we talk about loss of lives, they seem to be at the center of that discussion.
Right.
And not necessarily for protecting it, but for causing the harm. The reason why I asked the question about psychology is for a very simple reason. You see, this is a discussion we always have. How long does one train before they become a policeman? How many months?
Is it 6 or 7? Or is it 9 months?
It's 9 months at Kiganda.
Okay, now you tell me. How many months, how many years does one study before they qualify to do most jobs?
At least 4 years plus.
Yes, 2-3 years. Now you tell me, isn't there a bit of a problem here? Because
There is.
yes,
There is.
you want someone to have this onerous task of having to oversee security, and then you train them for 9 months.
And to add salt to injury is you're only training them on the difference between a lethal and non-lethal weapon, which to me is a misnomer because there's no non-lethal weapon. So you're only training them on tools. That's all.
And
You're-
order.
Yeah.
And how to follow order.
And just taking orders and tools. Lethal tools.
Yes.
Do you know how?
Look at other disciplines that
But that's the
we-
basic training of a police officer. Let's also remember that, right? At the
Yes.
entry level
Right.
of, it's like first year of college, right?
Right.
And then for you to move above that, at least after serving 5 years, now to move to the level where you get like a corporal mark, you have to go back for training.
It's true, but you see, you are unleashed into the unsuspecting world of individuals with this 9 months training. That's my problem. A first year, you're not doing anything, you're just studying. If you're a teacher, the best thing that happens, you go for teacher training. Or, I mean,
Teacher practice.
Teaching practice. That's what happens.
I suppose it's the same. Like if you are a doctor and you do 1 year, then you're set into the into the population, and then you say, okay, after 2 years, come back, we train you again, because you're actually doing the work.
Actually,
when you're
medical
there.
school is different.
No, I mean, just as an allude, even
Yes,
a lawyer, a
yes.
law school or whatever it is.
I say it's
You can do
different.
triage after first year.
Yes.
Yeah, you can. You can.
A lot of the training is actually practical. And that's why you move from Chiromo and come to whichever campus where they actually you actually interact
Spend
with the
time.
patient.
Training
Yes.
is important.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
From the incidences of torture that we see in the country, what is the highest percentage of perpetrators of torture?
Well, and this is looking at the statistics we
Not
have.
even numbers, but in terms
Percentage.
of typography. Who?
It's the National Police Service for sure.
Okay. Now, based on that, would you, in this definition, is torture premeditated?
I wouldn't say it's premeditated.
Okay.
I
So
wouldn't.
it's something that happens on the fly. Would you say that? That in an instant when something is happening, because you've thought somebody's arm was shot off, it's happening in a situation where there's some kind of aggravation. It's happening in a situation where maybe if other things and other factors had been balanced, that particular incident would not have taken place. Would you say that?
Those options are a bit limiting, if you ask me, because it's the structure. It's the structure that defeats everything, really, because if you're trained and the only thing you know is you shoot to kill
Okay.
or you cane
To harm.
to harm.
Yes.
In fact, you cane to maim, right? Do you think we would even talk about premeditate? Is there any thought? This is a program now.
Okay.
that's it.
So what you're saying then is that it is systemic
It
in
is
nature.
systemic.
Right? So anybody who's coming, so it doesn't matter then if you were trained for 9 months or 10 years. You're saying that you've gone into a system which almost expects you without saying, Obara, you will behave like this, without using the words, but it is assumed that this is what you are going to do.
This is what is expected
Expected of you,
This
right?
is what is expected of you.
Right.
And in fact, if you deviate, you look like an outlier.
So, the that person then who commits this act, are they not a victim as well?
You caught me right there. I wouldn't say they're victims, really and truly, because they suffer no harm whatsoever.
Men, are you
Emotional.
kidding me?
No. Look, but who is harming them?
Is it a public officer in official capacity?
Who is harming them?
The ecosystem
They've been
unleashed
introduced into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'll give you that, because then if I look at it in a different light, I'd be discrediting even the amount of work that IMLU has done. There's been an enormous amount of work that has gone into collaborating with these public officers in terms of training and retraining them, especially at the community level, and sometimes even at those high-ranking spaces where we talk about trauma. Yeah, how is it that they even debrief? Yeah, in their own small spaces.
Sure.
And you know that there are certain structures that obviously as a civil society we cannot, go over and above, but we have made the effort. We have at least even talked to them and even trained them and even opened up spaces for discussion, especially in terms of debriefing, the importance of debriefing, how is it that they relate with each other, because I know they already have the systems in place in terms of who debriefs them and how they do it. But you see, if you're going to be debriefing with your senior, is that debriefing? Because maybe they could be your stressors, right?
Yeah, because I'm thinking, even as you say that, I'm thinking of this very famous movie. What was that guy's name when he was asked? Jack Nicholson. You Can't Handle the Truth. And it came out to be that these people under him who were doing the act, again, a systemic thing, doing the act. And in a court of law... A few good men, exactly. And in a court of law, he spoke the words that these people were acting under his instruction, under the system. So it was not these 4 men, corporals then, who were put under the gallows. Yeah. It was then him who was going to then take culpability or assume culpability because of this murder or this torture that happened. And this is what I'm trying to get at. Because it must be a very difficult position then for you, where somebody is wielding a weapon, doesn't intend to see person X on the street and say, I have anything personal against them. But I know that any moving target, my job is to
shoot to kill. Sometimes even
I don't know
orders
this person, it's not personal.
Yep.
Somebody's told me to do it. Yeah. I don't know this individual. I don't know that you've gone down your flat to get airtime. I don't know who you are. Yeah. But this is my job. So should we be going for these individuals or should we be going for a system change?
Obviously, when the way we've been discussing is we've been looking at the direct service provision, what we do, the legal, the medical documentation, but there has to be a system change, to be quite honest, because that's the hardware. That's the hardware that we're dealing with. System change starts at the policy level. But you see, every time you're speaking about torture, if we only talk about the policy or the system change, the one who's seeking reparations doesn't even hear you because it's already happened. So what we're talking about with your question is the preventative aspect of torture. What we were talking about with reparations is now the responsive.
It has happened.
And yes, and now we are moving from responding. We really don't want to respond. It's expensive, it's tedious, it's painful, it's horrendous. What you're talking about is the policy level. Can we look at the data that we have? I mean, we have a very nice place to start from. We have a beautiful template, the TJRC report handed to the president in 2013, sometime in April. You have everything set for you. They have investigated, they have picked over 40,000 statements and confessions and whatever, and they have put together something so nice that tells you this is where there's a policy gap. This is the system change we expect. They've even given you the person responsible and the time frame. But have we seen anything? We still don't see much. I mean, we obviously keep doing the job and we have seen some, few steps being taken, but they're very trepid steps.
Right.
Very trepid steps.
What would it take then to see more? Usually they say that if you see one big fish going down and then it acts as deterrent for anybody else who might think that they can perpetuate the system. Would that be the same thing here?
I'd like let me answer your question though this way, that we have areas where we're seeing improvement and we have areas that we're still regressing. And my assertion where we are regressing is that we have still institutionalized torture in a way. So if we have it institutionalized and structured, we're still funding it. And the moment, it's the same thing, we disbanded SSU sometime in November, and I'll tell you free of charge, and you can quote me, is that we'll have it in another outfit soon.
If not,
Yeah, it's like NSAS
if
in
not
Nigeria.
already.
Yeah.
If not already,
Already established.
Latif, yes, if not
You're
already.
right. NSAS in Nigeria just took all those officers, disbanded SARS, and now
then
we have them.
A different outfit.
Yeah.
So that's the thing with the policy. And so sometimes we want to bury our heads in the sand and say, oh, but we already did. If it's good on paper, it does nothing for anyone. You have someone who lost their arm at 17, they're now 30. You have not paid the amounts of money. Someone was shot on the jaw and they fell down, and now they cannot speak properly, they cannot feed. What do we do for people like that?
Yeah.
What do we do for people like that? So we have regressed in other areas, but we have made progress. Let me give you a beautiful example. We have the Mavoko 3 judgment.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Opens up more space to discuss issues of forensic documentation. We look at geospatial engineering in questions of the law and how we even pick this particular evidence. We have the judgment we received as IMLU sometime for Migori. They're speaking of the positive obligation that the state has in terms of, ensuring that this person is safe, investigating, and issuing a continuous update and report to these people. So there are spaces where we are moving, but for how long will we just say that we are moving on paper? We have to have this 30 million Kenya shillings, 100 plus million owed to victims who have been compensated or rather have received declarations of violations in court. We have to see that they get their money. Those ones who need corrective surgery, let's see that. For argument's sake, the people who are supposed to be compensated based on the TGRC report, it's more than 10 years now. Have we done anything for them? Even the basic apology that was supposed to be given, it hasn't been done. So we are progressing academically and practically. What
do we need to do?
What we need to do from this point onwards is we must prioritize torture. We have deprioritized torture for the longest time ever. It's because we continue using it as a tool to repress opponents, to repress people who are questioning power, to even just deter people from seeking justice. We must prioritize torture moving forward. We have to start hearing discussions of torture from corporate entities.
Right.
We must start seeing politicians actually taking it very seriously. Yeah, we have to start seeing development partners now prioritizing it in every strategic intervention. Torture is now not just something we will keep kiki-kakaing about, because we've done that from 1963 up until now. That's the first thing that we need to do, because if we prioritize it, we'll start funding interventions that work around it. We'll start capacity building National Police Service officers, even officers like myself. City was asking about psychology and trauma competencies. There are actually things we can do, and I know we have everything readily available to prioritize torture.
What do we need for that? Political goodwill?
Political goodwill is everything.
Okay.
Because as civil society, if we don't have political goodwill or the space and enabling environment to operate, what will you do? You'll pull out all our certificates and tax exemptions.
How different would this be packaged? I'm looking at this era after Kanu left office and we had NAC. And all those people who had been tortured and all and were coming into government. We had the Wanyereke horrors. We had the justice minister who had worked with many victims of torture in the Nyayo torture chambers and all. It did not move.
We even had
cases of those people that have gone to court and they've actually been found, yes, these people were tortured,
yes,
and the government ought to compensate them.
Still not compensated. Hundreds of millions.
We have had a Chief Justice who is one of the foremost human rights defenders that this country has ever produced. He has sat as a Chief Justice, served an entire term, voluntarily retired early, but still nothing. So what else do we need to do now?
And the current Chief Justice has the sort of work you're doing under her belt as well.
Exactly.
What people will refer to as civil society.
What more do we
So everybody's in place. How come there's no...
There's no movement?
Well, there is movement, but it's subterranean. We don't see it clearly. So perhaps you ought to tell us what it is that is actually happening in that space, because our lived experience is that it's not easy to see the movement. But I sense there is movement.
Well, you're actually sensing right, especially because you have to see justice to be done and not just hear about it. Not just hear about it. First, this is now as a professional, and I may not speak for the judiciary or whatever, but I just feel like there are certain things that we can do immediately, not the far-fetched stuff, for us to see that we are actually reparating these victims. Let's start. If there's any amount that is being owed, what's so hard for it to be actualized, because there are people who are being owed from as far back as, I'm looking at some of our clients, as far back as 1996. They've never received the amounts up to date. Can we at least do that? Let's start from there. And maybe, for instance, some of the treaties that we've not ratified up until today, and we have had continuous recommendations, are we able to do that? There are things that we can do that we are not doing. Let's, for instance, look at the cases that have been in court for over. We are still in court for the Kingongo massacre families from 2000. It's 2023. Can we at least prioritize these cases and make sure that they're not part of the backlog that we still have? Yeah, there are things that can be done. We are just not doing them.
There's this subject of trauma and the effect of it. One doesn't just see it. When you live in a unit that you think is supposed to be an accommodation, which is just slightly worse than a pigsty, that is where many policemen live in, it's traumatic living there. When a really tired-looking bedsheet is the wall between you and your neighbor, that is a trauma. When you have vehicles that can't move because you don't have fuel, and yet you've received a call and you're supposed to go out to ensure that you conduct whatever it is you're supposed to conduct to provide the security service. This thing is perhaps more evident when you look at the police service. But if you look at our civil service, and if you look at how it is we have structured the service delivery within the various disciplines, you will find that very many people work in traumatic situations. Teachers not excluded.
Yeah.
Doctors not excluded.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm picking on this. So you find that the mindset that we have is born out of this trauma. And how it manifests in this country is how we trivialize and make light of very serious issues. It's relief. It's our coping mechanism. And the reason why we're so good at it is because there is a lot of it. So unless you find a way of finding relief, whether it's comic or otherwise, you'll probably go mad. Now, your profession has a very big role, because it's you people who understand these laws that are supposed to be the lamppost and the guide and the pathway and the light that shines on our path as we move along. So I'm simply saying your work is cut out, because it is not simple.
I'm just listening to you, and being that I am a human rights practitioner, I would be tempted to just say, no, it's just for the victims. But I'd have you know that we've also come into close contact with police officers who've been tortured, sometimes by their own or some other facets of, officers from the public service. So it's not just victims. And the moment we say that you are due for reparation, we are not saying that you can't be a public officer, because we also have public officers in our particular registry or files or whatever. I speak for everyone. But now, in terms of the conditions in which we work in, I'm not a state officer, so I'm not able to speak firmly 10 toes on that. But then the thing with reparations is that once you're a victim, we don't try to say, oh, maybe they were a former state officer, maybe now they're not. If you're a victim, you're a victim. I could be one, you could be one. Fine, our work is cut out for us. But then again, we play just a very small role around this, right? Because there are other people who bring everything together. So if you're telling me that all I need is just to go to court and go to court and go to court, what happens to these other things that need to be done for us to see reparations? There's so many other key players. We have investigators who are also, again, police officers, and we have good ones for that matter. And some. So fine, my work is cut out, but everyone's work
is cut out
around torture is cut out. You, as a person who gets to sit on this particular platform and speak to 1 million people, your work is cut out too. You get to understand torture.
Just 1 million.
That's what I was wondering.
Did I?
Emotional
so let's say 10 million. Is it 10 million? So, City, respectfully, your work is also cut out. You can speak about torture every other place you go to. You have a voice. People see you highly and they hold you to regard. And if you spoke and said, this is not right, they will actually see that it's not right. When we see these memes going around, I saw a meme where a police officer was hit by another person, and it was the funniest meme, apparently. And it kept going around.
Do you know why?
Tell me why.
Pwagu kupata pwaguzi.
Yes, exactly.
Latte.
The shoe is on the other foot.
City, no.
The button. You see, the very point I'm making, for it to be humorous, this very public is also traumatized. You see, trauma is an interesting thing, and the way it manifests itself.
Yeah.
You only need to see people who've grown up in homes that are abusive to understand it.
Right.
Because the very things that they see will manifest in their lives when they're adults. And some of them may not even understand why it is they're behaving the way they're behaving.
This warrants a totally different discussion because you're onto something. We have people who've experienced adverse childhood trauma. I mean, and I digress just so I can explain and maybe flesh out your point. There are things that seem very normal to us. If you are being hit as a person, now you're in the service, I could hit you just a little bit. I mean, I'm just trying to get you to move to another place, right? I'm just getting you to... So my thing is, with that warrants a whole different discussion. We'd be happy to bring our psychological lead here to discuss with you that.
Please do. When? Let's
Yes,
talk about it.
we
after
are
this.
happy to do that. They'll tell you more around that. The way we are socialized, the environments we grow in, and how it
And
then
how that
manifests.
affects us.
Yeah.
Isabella.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you,
today.
Latif.
And all the best. Yes, all our jobs are cut out. Sawa.
Yes.
We take that.
Asante.
Isabella Obara is a technical lead, a litigation and legal advisor at the Independent Medical Legal Unit. Thank you for joining us. And Wangari, thank you very much for surviving the 4 hours.
I had a great time.
Come back again soon.
I will.
And Isabella, you'll also be welcome
I'll be
soon
happy.
as a guest host.
I'll take you up on that offer. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for tuning in to Kenya's biggest conversation.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.